Welcome to the Planted Places Spring Training. This training is a 3-part video series that is designed to help you learn how to grow organic leafy greens and herbs in living soil. And as a result, you're going to have more energy, improved health, and vitality in life. And we're going to teach this to you without you having to have any gardening knowledge, prior gardening knowledge, without you spending a lot of time in the garden, not having to have a house with lots of open space, and without using any chemicals that supposedly work miracles for you. This 3-part series is really designed to give you a sneak peek behind the scenes of what we do at Planted Places in our membership. You are going to be inspired to live a healthy lifestyle, and more importantly, you're going to inspire those around you to also live a healthy lifestyle. So we're going to do this the planted way. Let me explain how. So the first video is going to be called Get Planted, and that is all about teaching you how to grow organically leafy greens and herbs. We're going to show you how to do that in living soil, and we're going to show you how to do that in small containers at your home. The second video is called Get Nourished, and that is all about how do you take what you're growing and get that into your daily diet. And then third is Get Grounded. And really that's all about balance, healthy habits, everything you need to be doing so that you can be enjoying this lifestyle. And we're gonna throw in some bonuses as well. Okay, so my name is Christy Ross, and I am the founder of Planted Places. And my company helps people achieve a healthy, balanced lifestyle through organic gardening. And you're probably wondering, how did I get into this? So I had a living wall business, an ornamental living wall business, where we have beautiful succulent walls, beautiful indoor 3-story walls. And I had a client that wanted to grow food on a wall. And I thought that was the most amazing thing to do, but yet I had no idea how to do that. I've been a gardener all of my life. It's easy to garden, but when it comes to growing food, that was extremely intimidating for me. I thought I had a brown thumb, even though I was a really good gardener in the ornamental space. And the reason for that is because it is hard. And I actually had experienced a lot of disasters like a lot of people do. And so what I did is I actually got together with different experts in organic gardening and learned about the soil, and we tested different soils and we tested different seedlings. And from all that, I designed a system that allowed people to grow easily on vertical mobile structures, but also in small containers. And what I did is I worked through all the different fail points that I was experiencing, and we worked that into the system so that we could really create an easy and convenient way for people to grow food. People think about growing food completely wrong. They think it's for homesteaders who live off the grid and want to grow all their own food, or they think it's for retired people that have plenty of time, or maybe it's for people that have homes with really large space so they can grow a lot of raised beds. And really, at the end of the day, we all think it's for people who have a lot of time and who are really into gardening. And I want to let you know that it wasn't until I learned how to grow in living soil was it truly a game changer. A lot of unexpected things happened along the way. What I realized is my health absolutely improved, but not only that, I inspired my kids. I have 3 kids at home, and they never touched leafy greens before. And when they started growing on the wall and in containers around my house, it piqued their interest. And now they eat leafy greens in salads and scrambled eggs. They put them in their sandwiches. They eat salads at night with dinner. This was something that never happened before. In fact, good God, my son who's in college wanted to start growing lettuce and microgreens in his apartment. My experience had been, I hired someone to build a raised bed for me, but only to discover that the moles created a superhighway under my raised bed and ate the roots of my seedlings along the way. I spent a lot of money on a watering system, only to find that it didn't water evenly and I had to hand water every day. All of this happened. It was extremely frustrating. I look at that raised bed that I had built, and all I'm looking at is diseased plants. And then I look back at the planted wall structure that we created, and I marvel at how easy we've made it for people. Most importantly, what I learned is I learned how to do something that I thought was really hard and intimidating, and it gave me confidence. And as a result, I've been able to explore and expand what I'm doing. And now I teach lots of people how to do this. And then I learned that there are only 60 years of harvest left in the world for topsoil. That's mind-boggling. What does that mean for my kids? What does that mean for their kids? Where's their food going to come from? I'm super excited because I realized that in the past, I studied molecular biology in college because I was really passionate about it. A lot of people took that knowledge and went on to medical school. I went the way of business. And now I feel like it's come all full circle for me because I'm able to combine all my years of experience as a businesswoman, launching new products and businesses with my passion for science to really help solve a problem that is out there and real for people today. I get up in the morning and I'm excited to learn what else can we do to really have an impact on consumers' health, but also on the health of the planet for future generations, for my family, for your family. This really matters. So let's get into this. The first thing we're going to do today is all about getting planted, and we're going to focus on the 4 pillars that we really do with Planted Places. And again, remember, this is all about making it easy and convenient for people. We want to take out those stressors, and which the big part of that is knowledge and time. And so with Planted Places, we really eliminate that by doing that heavy lifting for you. But this training is going to be about explaining, going behind the scenes and explaining what we do. So those 4 pillars are, number 1, the most important, living soil. It is all about the soil. And so I'm going to spend some time talking to you about that. The second thing is your growing conditions. So that has to do with things like where's the sun, sunlight, watering, microclimates. All of those things are very important. The third is seedlings. Seedlings actually are small, tiny plants. They're kind of like baby plants. And it's really understanding what a healthy seedling looks like. What are the growth stages of a seedling to get to harvest? How do you know? How can you detect that? How do you harvest? How do you then replenish that once it's done being harvested? And then the fourth thing is pest management. And that is something that if you've ever grown before, or even when you garden outdoors with ornamental, pests can be a problem. And so we've really designed a system to make it easy for you to detect and eradicate pests when they come. You're never going to completely eliminate pests, but you certainly can create strategies so that it makes it easier for you. Okay, let's start talking about soil. So the first thing before we get going is I want to bring up this issue that there's only 60 years of topsoil left in the world. And this is a big deal. And I think a lot of it is we need to understand what living soil actually is and the role that it plays in climate change in the world. It stores carbon, and that is a big deal. In fact, 1% of organic matter per acre stores 10 tons of carbon. And it does that because plants bring in carbon dioxide, and the carbon, 40% of that carbon goes into the soil, is actually stored in the soil. So the more we know about this, the more we learn about it and apply some of these regenerative practices in our own homes, I think it's going to have an impact on the larger picture in terms of how we really look at farms and traditional farming. So let's go forward with understanding what's in our soil. So if you look at a traditional just kind of breakdown of soil, really 50% of it is air and water. And so think about that when you're planting in your flower beds and when you're planting in your containers and such, is that you want to make sure that you have airflow in your soil. You don't want to have really packed soil. The air and the water, that is where all of the microbial activity happens in the living soil. That is where the nutrients are actually being absorbed by the roots. It's so the roots can actually grow into the soil. All of that's very important. 45% of that is mineral particles. Basically, that's just your clay, your silt, your sand. Just different compositions of that. And then 5% is actually the organic matter that we really care about. So only 5% of the total pie is really where all that living activity is going on. That's where the microbes are. We call those macroorganisms. That's really the earthworms and the arthropods that are in the soil. Bacteria, fungi, mold. Then there's dead matter like roots, dead insects. And then there's something called humus, which is just very, very old material that is a slow release breakdown of nitrogen and nutrients that the plant takes up. Very, very old material. So let's talk about this organic matter and the role it plays in the nutrients that plants bring up. So when you think about plant nutrients, you're probably familiar with the NPK, which is basically nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. But these are called macronutrients, and these are the three main elements that plants need for. In fact, they need a lot of different vitamins and minerals, but these are the three main ones that drive most of the growth. So nitrogen is by far the most important key role in building proteins, which basically means it's building the cell structure of the plant. It's responsible for the growth. It also is a major component of chlorophyll, which must be present for photosynthesis to happen. You've got phosphorus, which is all about root growth and helping with fruit production. So if you're growing tomatoes, you want to have lots of phosphorus in that soil. And then potassium is also important for cell production photosynthesis, and it also helps with disease protection, builds up a strong immune system. So those are your macronutrients. So when we are looking at living soil and we're looking at soil biology, we want to make sure that we've got microbial activity going on that is breaking down organic matter, that's providing these nutrients to the roots, which I'll talk about in a second. Micronutrients, trace minerals. These are basically, sometimes you'll hear the word trace elements. It's the same thing as micronutrients. What you need to know is there's probably over 70 different vitamins and minerals that plants use in small amounts. Macronutrients, they use in large amounts, but the micronutrients, they use those in small amounts. And they all have different roles that they play. Don't really need to know all of that. Really, the important thing is there's basic metabolic functions of a plant that all of these nutrients help to support. So one of the things that I want to walk through is really understanding the soil that we provide with planted places. What is in that soil? Because you'll find that what's in that soil are all of the really important nutrients that the living soil that the plants need. Briefly, here is a breakdown of the soil that we provide to our planted places customers. The important thing here is that we really do a lot of the heavy lifting for our members, and we provide them with really nutrient-rich soil so that they don't have to be worrying about studying what they need to be adding and amending to the soil over time. We take care of all that for people. And so we give people the actual soil. It's a proprietary soil. And then we provide amendments and trace elements that are needed throughout the year to keep refueling that soil every time those seedlings are replaced. And so we're not going to go into detail about this right now, but really the purpose of this slide is to show you there's a lot of different ingredients in the soil, and each one of them is providing something very important to the soil. So there's a lot of components here that are providing the macronutrients, but we've got a lot of micronutrients and trace elements that are also in this soil. And so this is important because not only is it really rich, nutrient-dense soil, but it also has components in there that really help with the soil texture. So biochar is just one element that I really want to highlight. This is something that's kind of a volcanic material that lasts for literally thousands of years. And the big part of what biochar is doing is it's increasing the surface area of the soil. So the beneficial microbes that are in the soil, they have a really enhanced surface area with which to do their work, so to speak. And so even though we're growing in small containers, usually we grow in about a half-gallon container, that size is actually, the surface area that we're growing in is much larger than that because of what the biochar is providing. Worm castings is another thing that I'm going to highlight in here. Worm castings, I'll talk about a little bit later when I actually show you what those look like, but these are really, really important. These are kind of like the black gold of the soil that's in here. They provide over 60 trace elements. As you remember before, there's about 70 trace elements that actually provide the nutrients for the plant. So it provides almost all those nutrients that the worm castings need, the micronutrients. And it's got a perfect pH for soil. Soil needs to be around 6.8 to 7 to grow vegetables and leafy greens. And the worm casting really helps to enrich the soil and balance out that pH. So that's another component that's super important. Another one that's really good here, azomite. This is a really important addition to the soil as well. It's actually a rock dust that is naturally occurring of volcanic rock. It's from Utah, and it's really a combination of volcanic ash and seawater, and it created a really nutrient-dense rock dust for the soil. So that's also in there, and it also plays a nice role in the pH balance of the soil as well. So all of these nutrients are there, they're in the soil. And what's really important to know is that the microbial activity, so all those bacteria, the earthworms, the microbes, the bacteria, the fungi, all of those are in the soil because what they're doing is they're breaking down the organic material here. So the alfalfa meal and the feather meal and the bone meal, all of those things are being broken down. The plant roots, those are all being broken down by the microbes in the soil so that it becomes a usable form for the roots. The roots actually of the plant cannot take up these nutrients, these organic nutrients, just because they're in the soil. It's those microbes that have to break those down, and the byproduct of those microbes is actually what is feeding the plants. So that's kind of showing you the balance between, you need the microbes, you need it to be living in order to convert this organic matter into something the plant can take up. Okay, so I think I've gone enough into the soil biology lesson for the day. Let's go into the garden and actually look at some of the materials I'm talking about. Okay, so we're covering a lot of information so far here on soil. And what I want to show you, let's get out of the slides, let's go into the garden. And I want to show you some examples of what I'm talking about when I talk about living soil and I talk about the soil planted places uses for our customers, and really how we go about doing it for you and taking all the hard work out of it. You can imagine what happens when you have to start testing your soil chemistry and checking for the biology, which really the only way you truly can detect that is by looking at the leaves, understanding color discoloration, things like that. And so what we're doing here is we're giving you what you need. So if you look here, this is an example of the soil that we have, that we give to people when they first start. And if you look closely there, you can see there's some fibers in there. That's the coconut coir that we talked about. But inside here is biochar and alfalfa meal and worm castings, all that product we talked about, gypsum. I mean, it goes on and on. You saw that, and we'll make that available as a download for you as well at the end of the training. But that's your soil. And then what happens here is I wanted to kind of show you, I've got some pieces here. This is the actual organic fertilizer mix, okay? And that really is primarily the marine-based fertilizers. So it's got your crab meal in there and your sea kelp, a lot of those materials that bring in the nitrogen, the macronutrients, and the micronutrients that you need. And then we have something called mycorrhizal fungi, which I touched upon. There it is right there. That, when you plant, you want to get that really close to the roots. Mycorrhizal fungi is very important for for uptake of nutrients by the roots. And how it works is it's a symbiotic relationship between the fungi and the root structure. And what happens is the roots are feeding out sugars to the fungi, and the fungi then are getting their energy from the sugars that the root is giving it, and then it's extending out into the soil, out into those, remember we talked about biochar and all the air pockets, all that surface area it creates, and that fungi is going in almost kind of like a cotton, kind of a piece of cotton. It's extending into the soil, and it's extending the reach of the roots, and that is how the roots pick up about 75% more nutrients as a result of using mycorrhizal fungi. So that's a key component for when you are first planting your seedlings. And then of course there is the worm castings, and these are kind of like, I want to show you, it just looks like really dark soil if you look at it. If you compare it, do this, if you compare the difference, do you see? It's just really dark small granules. And when you're planting, especially when you're planting in containers and in pots, if you see that darker kind of soil, that probably means there are worms inside your pots, and they are doing their thing. And as a result, you have worm castings, natural worm castings just appearing in the soil, which is gold, and you want that. Let me talk just for 1 second before I move on to talk about worm castings a little bit more, and that is talking about composting versus worm bins. And I'm sure you hear about composting all of the time. I'm not going to spend time in this training on that. That is absolutely how you create your own organic material over a period of probably about 3 to 4 months, from your food scraps, kind of dried scraps. We call that the brown material from your yard waste, but also food scraps from your kitchen, avoiding any kind of meat. But that is how you create your own natural organic matter. You can do that compost. I like worm bins, and the reason why I like worm bins is it's much smaller space and it's much lower maintenance. And I'm busy, I'm running a business, I got 3 boys. Time is of an essence for me. And so what I do when I have soil that I have been growing seedlings in, and I've replenished that seedling in that pot about 3 times, at that point 3 to 4 times, that soil needs to be reconditioned a little bit more. And so I'll put that into a worm bin, and all I do is I add my lettuce scraps, just my kitchen scraps, primarily just my leafy greens and my vegetable scraps that I have. I put that in the worm bin, and the worms, literally within a matter of a week or 2, you have worm castings in there. You don't have to wait months. It's a very quick thing. And so whenever I'm planting my pots, my seedlings, I'm replenishing new seedlings into my pots, I go over to the worm bin and I scoop out some of that really, really rich worm casting, some of that rich castings, and I throw that into the soil, because that is perfect amendment or perfect fertilizer for the soil. Okay, great. So now we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about the next really important thing, and that is growing conditions. So we talked primarily and a lot of time about soil, because soil is really the most important component for growing organic vegetables, leafy greens, herbs, vegetables, everything. It really is about the soil. But let's also talk about the conditions, because without sunlight, you can't grow food. You can use grow lights inside, but really sunlight is the optimal condition that you want. So the first thing I want to talk about, though, is when you talk about growing conditions, you're looking at location. Where am I going to grow? And the beautiful thing about planted places, and really kind of what differentiates us besides using soil, living soil, is the containers and the vertical systems that we use. So it's really important that we allow anybody to be able to grow. You do not need a house with a large yard and having to build a raised bed. You don't need to do that. In fact, it's much easier to grow in small containers and vertically. There's certain things you cannot grow in small containers, but that we're not talking about that right now. What we're talking about is leafy greens, lettuces, herbs, micro fruits like micro tomatoes and peppers. You can do a lot of those kinds of things. Radishes, there's carrots, mini carrots. The list is very big. But what I want to show you is we grow in these grow pots, and they're felt pots. And what's really good about that is that the seedling is not going to get root bound, okay? When you are in a terracotta or a plastic pot, something like that, the roots are going to grow, and they just kind of hit that hard surface, and they're just going to start growing in circles. And that is called root bound, and that is not good for the plant. When you have here, what happens is it grows into the material, and a lot of the microbial activity actually goes into the material as well. So you actually have increased surface area just with the pot as well. And then what we do when we're, so here's an example of a parsley that's growing in one of our pots. And then we also have our pots on, let me see here, I'm just going to grab one off the wall. Here we go. When you are growing vertically in our system, we place these pots inside, we call it a hex pot, inside a pot, and that hangs vertically on a wall system that we've designed. And you can see here, it's got a hole in the top and a hole on the bottom, and the water runs through the system. So it's a very, very convenient system, because you can hang something vertically, take up hardly any space. Right now, this unit, I have 33 pots on it, front and back, and it takes up the space of roughly a person standing. So 21 inch by 21 inch space, you're growing 33 plants. Can you imagine what that looks like if you spread that across in the ground for the same space that a raised bed would take up? It would be a very large space, very large piece of land that you need. So you can be doing this obviously on decks and patios. A lot of our customers do it in their backyard, where they might have a lot of space, but they just don't want to dedicate space to a raised bed, so they grow it on a wall instead. So location's important, but the really important thing about that is the system and your pots they're mobile. You can move them. The wall system is on wheels. These are pots, so you move them where you need them throughout the year to follow the sun. And that's the key part. You're not limited to one location. So let's talk about sun and why that's important. So you want to really, before you start to grow food, you really want to have a good understanding of where is the sunlight in your backyard. And really optimal sun is 6 to 8 hours a day. Okay, 6 to 8 hours. You can get by with 4 to 6 hours, but really 6 to 8 hours is ideal. Why is that ideal? You're going to have faster growth for your plants. So we're going to be sending you seedlings. That's what we send people. We don't send seeds, we send seedlings. And if you're getting optimal sun and you're watering regularly and you're not letting those dry out, the soil dry out too much, you're going to have fast growth and you're going to get to harvest very quickly, sometimes as fast as 2 weeks. In the summer, it could be even 1 week. It's very fast, but you have to have that sun. 4 to 6 hours, you can do that, but it's going to be slower growth. 2 to 4 hours of sun, I would not recommend growing food, because really vegetation, vegetables, leafy greens, they need the sunlight. Why do they need the sunlight? It's called photosynthesis. That is how the plant takes in food. So let me explain what I mean by that. It takes in the carbon dioxide from the environment, okay? It takes that in, it breaks that down, it brings the carbon into the plant, through the roots, into the soil, and the soil actually stores the carbon. The microbial activity that is there, it forms a glue-like substance with the carbon, and it stores carbon. So it's so cool. This is why growing food in your own backyard, you're actually taking carbon dioxide out of the environment. It's a wonderful thing. And I know I've talked a lot about it, but it's fascinating. It's why I'm so excited and passionate about this. If you don't have sunlight, you don't have photosynthesis. So you need that sunlight because you need the leaves in order for photosynthesis, which is taking the carbon dioxide into the leaves and into the plant and converting that into energy and nutrients the food can eat. That's why we have mobile structures. You can move it around, but you really want to be cognizant of where are the shadows. You want to look around your backyard or your patio, and you want to look for where's there a shade structure that's going to block the sun during the day, and just kind of pay attention to that before you really kind of pick your location where you want to do it. What I do is I in the summer, in this location where I am right now, this is a great place for the wall. In the winter, this is not a great place for the wall. I need to move it to another part of my backyard where it gets more sun. And you always want morning sun. Morning sun is always the most important. And you also want south facing. If you have to if you have to grow indoors, you're in an environment, let's say you're in the winter and you have very cold temperatures outside and you cannot grow, but you really want to grow food. If you can find a good south-facing window that is getting at least 6 to 8 hours, 8 hours is even better, of sun all day long in those windows, you probably can have good success. We have customers that live in Incline Village in California, covered in snow, and they are growing bok choy and arugula and all sorts of things because they have that great condition of a south-facing window. But know that. Next thing I want to talk about is watering. That's another. So for your growing conditions, we talk about, it's about temperatures, it's about sun, and it's about water. And let's touch on water, and then we'll touch a little bit on temperatures. But watering, really important. I'm going to show you some slides where I show you some examples of what does it look like when a plant is underwatered and what does it look like when a plant is overwatered. And the important thing here is when you're looking about herbs, when you're talking about herbs in general, and so I'm talking here thyme, oregano, rosemary, lavender, mint, all of those, they generally like to dry out between waterings. So you water them and then you let that soil dry out and then you water it again. If it's constantly wet, they will not like that. They will start to, if you have brown tips around the leaves, they will really suffer, and most herbs won't make it if they're just constantly sitting in water. The only herb that doesn't mind being moist throughout would be a cilantro. And cilantro typically likes a little bit cooler temperatures to grow in, but you can get away with, if it really dries out, a cilantro, that soil gets really dried out, it will probably start to bolt. Don't worry, I'll talk about bolting later. But generally, parsley, your other herbs, they're very forgiving. If things dry out a little bit and then you water it, it's going to usually bounce right back up. But your lettuces and your leafy greens, you need to make sure they're hydrated, because what happens is that if you if that soil becomes really dry, what's going to happen is it's going to be more prone for disease. It's going to weaken that plant because it's not getting the nutrition, that the roots is not taking up the nutrition like it should be, and so it's going to weaken it. And as a result, the disease and the pests are going to attack. Pests and disease stay away from a healthy plant. It's almost like insect repellent for it. So part of it being healthy is having healthy soil, but it's also being well hydrated. Very important. So we'll take a look at those pictures right now and get a good sense for how to detect underwatering, overwatering conditions. Examples of overwatering. And as you can see, if you look at this soil here, it's really moist, very, very damp. And there's two things here. This one on the left, this is exactly what root rot looks like. What you can see here is the stem of the plant literally just broke off, and you can see here it's sort of decaying. And so what happens with the root rot, it's absolutely a side effect of overwatering. What's happened is that in the soil, there is way too much water and not enough oxygen, and the roots are basically drowning in the water is what's happening. And so it's not able to take up oxygen. There's the microbial activity that's happening, the nutrient uptake, all of that cannot happen when there's so much water. So everything is sort of stunted, and the roots are kind of slowly dying. So that plant is slowly dying. And so over here on the right-hand side, you can see, you obviously can't feel this, but if you were to look closely, these leaves are very limp. Like, I can just tell when you look at them, it's usually the outer growth first that goes first, but it's very, very limp. And then if you just kind of look here, it's starting to discolor a little bit. So this plant is also experiencing the early stages of root rot. That's what that looks like. Okay, the next thing that we want to show you is underwatering. So, believe it or not, with our members, I find that this seems to be the bigger issue for people is not watering enough. And so I wanted to show some pictures because sometimes the signs are subtle and sometimes they're very obvious and very drastic. So right over here in this example here, you can tell that this needs to be watered because just simply by the color of the soil. The soil looks very dry. It's very light brown, whereas when it was wet, like the prior screen, it was very dark brown. So usually we tell people you want to put your finger in the soil and you want to go down about a half an inch or an inch. And if you go down about a half an inch or an inch and it's bone dry, that needs to be watered. The one thing with the soil that we give our customers, there's something called coconut core in that soil, and that really helps keep the moisture in, and it doesn't dry out as much, which is a good thing because especially in the summer months when it's really hot, you don't want it drying out. You don't have to be watering it every couple hours, and so that's a good thing. But in the winter and slower growth months when things don't dry out as much, it's more of a concern. So you have to really watch the watering and not water as much in the winter. This plant here, this is a mustard, and you can't tell, again, if you were not up close to that plant, you'd be like, oh, it looks okay, but really these leaves are really drooping, and that's how you can tell. Same thing here, you've got the soil, the color discoloration. As I mentioned before, herbs can handle drying out. So these herbs don't really look that stressed, even though they need to be watered, but it's time to water those. Over here, this is a plant. This actually was one of a customer's wall that she sent me, and she's frantic because, oh my God, what's happened? All of my plants are dying. And I looked at it immediately and I knew she needs to water. And it happened to be a very hot day that day. And this is something important in terms of when you can tell these are young seedlings. These were just planted. They're probably maybe a few days, maybe 5 days, a week in the pot. They're just getting settled in. When you first plant seedlings, the roots are doing a lot of work behind the scenes. You don't see a lot of activity up front, so you're not going to see a lot of foliage growth at first because the roots are getting settled in their new home. And so that's important. But it's important because once that happens, then the leaves will start growing. But what's going on here is this plant is stressed. Two things going on. It's underwatered, but also in the heat of the day, this happened to be a very hot day. In the heat of the day, they're sitting there getting blasted in the sun. She has a great location because she gets a lot of sun in this location. But what she'll need to do is, especially in the summertime, is when the afternoon comes, she needs to position her wall. Remember, it's on wheels, so she can move that very easily, but she's going to need to position it so that she's getting morning sun. And then by the time it gets to be like 1 or 2 in the afternoon, she probably wants that thing in filtered shade because it's going to get blasted. Or she just needs to water multiple times in the morning and again at nighttime, which she can do because she has a timer. But the good news is, I told her, you need to water right away. And she watered and it perked up, like literally within about 30 minutes, the leaves perked up and everything was fine. And that's generally what happens. If it's a healthy seedling, it can take it. It's you know, obviously you don't want to overly stress it all the time, but you know, it's telling you, water me. Okay, there you go. So that is under and over watering conditions. So another important part of growing conditions for plants, we talked about sunlight and we talked about watering, is really climate and temperature. And you know, everybody knows that spring is when you start gardening and fall is when things kind of start slowing down. But if you know what you're doing, you've got healthy soil and you're growing the right types of seedlings, you can generally do that year round in most environments. And it really is all about understanding your microclimate. And when I say microclimate, I mean, I'm located in Northern California, and there are so many different microclimates just in Northern California. You've got the coastal region, which tends to be cooler and more damp, and then you go inland a little bit and it's very dry and it's got more it has more fluctuations in temperatures, cooler nights, warmer days. You know, it's not like a desert, but it's definitely got more temperature fluctuation. So you really need to know your microclimate. If you live on a hill or maybe you live in a valley, you're going to have a very different type of microclimate from someone who maybe lives on top of the hill. So you want to understand that, and you want to know the sweet spot. And so generally the sweet spot for temperatures for growing is kind of like low is kind of in the 40s. That's like the low range, and the high range is probably going to be in your high 80s into the 90s, but those are kind of like, those are really like the edges of the sweet spot. 60s, 70s, that's really good. Now, certainly in the Planted Places membership, we're sending you seasonal seedlings. So we're sending you the types of seedlings that are going to grow well in the winter versus the ones that are going to grow in the summer. So let's take lettuce. There is a type of lettuce called summer crisp head. It's very heat tolerant. It does very well in the winter. I'm sorry, in the summer. Summer crisp heads, they do very well in the summer. Very heat tolerant. So, you know, you can have days where it's going to 100, 105, and as long as you're watering consistently, that lettuce is going to be okay. That's a very important component I want to talk about in terms of temperatures, is you really want to be careful in the summer when you're, especially if you're growing lettuces and leafy greens, you want to make sure it has morning sun. And if you're in an area where it's going to be in the 90s frequently, you want to make sure that those leafy greens and lettuces, that they are in the shade, filtered shade in the sun, in the afternoon, because it's just a lot of heat. It can take it, but it's just putting a lot of extra pressure on that plant, and that plant is having to work overtime to hydrate itself. And so for that, morning sun, filtered shade in the afternoon, and then you want to make sure you water first thing in the morning. You want to get those roots well nourished and nice and hydrated in the morning so they can withstand the heat later in the day. That's very important. We tell our customers with the Planted Wall, they have timers, and we tell them, set that timer in the summer. If you're in a drier climate and it's going to be in the 90s consistently, you set that timer in the morning to go off every morning. And you know, usually it's 30 minutes, however long it takes for that water to flow consistently all the way through the system. And that's really important. Sometimes on really hot days, we recommend watering twice, in the morning and then again at the end of the day once the sun is kind of going down. Important for hydration. Okay, so that is really the big thing with the growing and in the temperatures and your growing patterns. Okay, so that's a wrap. That concludes day 1 of our spring training. This was all about getting planted and learning the basics for how to grow leafy greens and herbs in living soil and doing it the planted way. So we covered a lot of ground today. We covered living soil, everything you need to know about what's inside that soil. How do you keep it healthy and living all year round, harvest after harvest. We covered growing climates and the sun, and why the sun is important and how much sun you need. And we talked about irrigation and conditions of overwatering and underwatering. And we talked about climate and microclimates and temperature changes. So I'm very excited because tomorrow what we have to look forward to is we're moving into Get Nourished, and that's all about health. And we're going to talk about the nutrient density that's in those leafy greens and in that lettuce and in those herbs, and why you want to get that inside your body, and not only yours, but your friends and your loved ones. And we're going to talk to Robin Joy, Happy Food Chef. She's one of our frequent partners that's in part of our Planted membership, and she is going to talk about the importance of how you get leafy greens into your diet, and really about how you make delicious food with all of this great food you're growing, because it always comes down to delicious food. If it's not good, you're not going to eat it. And so she's got a lot of tips and tricks that she shares with us. Please share your thoughts. What was your biggest takeaway from this learning? What is something new that you did not know before? Love to know that we're creating new gardeners out there, and new food gardeners at that. So we will see you in the next training. Thanks, everybody.